Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining the Boardroom Club today to our AI Summit featuring executives from top tech companies revolutionizing the world as we speak. My name is Yossi Garmazi, and I'm joined here also by a good friend of mine, Alvaro Jimenez. Alvaro?
Happy to be here, Yossi.
Yeah, so today we are fortunate enough to interview none other than Keith Peiris, co-founder and CEO of Lightfield, a company that revolutionizing the CRM space that can actually understand your customers and go to market. Keith's story is incredible and it's what entrepreneurship is all about. As he previously founded and led Tome, a company that burst into the scene and just in a couple of years been used by more than 25 million users. But once they understood that LLMs are good at starting work, but lack the context required to finish it, they decided to pivot and started Lightfield. So, Keith, thank you so much for joining us today.
Excited to be here.
Likewise. And Keith, I wanted to start by a little bit about your background because you started your career at Facebook, then worked on the early Instagram team. But how did your experience building at scale shape your approach to starting all of your companies later on? And specifically, what lesson did you learn from the social networking world that helped you later on to catapult all your companies?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I learned some good things and some bad things that I needed to unlearn. I would say before even Facebook, I started a company when I was 11 with my father. I was designing websites for different companies and selling it to them. We had 5 people working out of our basement, and I learned a lot about pitching and selling through that experience. And that's maybe one of the experiences that led me to Lightfield. At Facebook, I joined 2011 and worked on a bunch of the sort of language technology while there. Worked on search, worked on machine translation, voice. And there I learned all about what machine learning is good at and what it's not good at, sort of pre-LLM. And that's actually where our head of AI came from. And at Instagram, I feel like I had hard lessons about how to make good product because when you're at Facebook and you've got billions of people using your product, there's sort of this culture you could experiment with anything and then the data would teach you. And I had a lot of bad ideas. I threw them out into the world. You'd turn them on for 1% of Turkey or something, see how they do. And then if it was a bad idea, you'd shut it down. If they liked it, you'd keep going. And it was this very like empirical approach to product development. Then I got to Instagram and a completely different mindset. It was like, I think 40 employees at the time. It was very much a curated vision from the founders, for Mike and Kevin. It was this what fits into our mission, what fits into our mission. Let's build the best version of it, make sure we love it, make sure the company loves it, and then we put it out into the world. And I found that was actually maybe the most important experience that I took when going to a startup, because when you're at a startup, you don't get to experiment on cohorts of users. By definition, nobody cares about what you're building. So at a minimum, you have to build something that you love, that you like, and you use every day. And then if you do that, you can sort of authentically convince others to use it.
Yeah, that's exciting. And specifically that you worked in two of these companies right at the beginning. I mean, before it was the juggernaut that we see now with all the meta glasses and all of that sort of stuff. And it's exciting because, as you mentioned, it's all about the customers and just like pitching the idea and seeing what grasp. And indeed, your first company exploded just in a couple of years. Tome rose to more than 25 million users, which is amazing. Looking back, what do you think drove this kind of explosive growth and early adoption?
Honestly, the most important thing to land is that I think for your product to work, your company to work, it sort of needs to be culturally inevitable and technologically possible, right? And it's very important to meet both of these conditions. And when I think about the backdrop of what made Tome work, we were building a new way to communicate using LLMs, using transformers. And we were sort of right about LLMs were going to change the way people would communicate. We were wrong about it would change the way people construct slides. More on that later. But there is a technological inevitability around people. People are going to change the way they communicate using this technology. And then the cultural part came from the demand being created from ChatGPT, the demand being created from Claude coming out and Jasper and some of those early things. So now you've got people in the world that are like, oh, I want to use LLMs to do work, be productive, and communicate, right? And then the technology is getting there. It's like sort of there. And then it's just a matter of timing. And it's not really about first mover advantage. It's sort of about how close can your product launch to that moment in time when all of those conditions are true. And then, like, how do you maximize it, right? And I think we put a lot of effort into the product feeling simple, the product looking really good. And I think that's what made it so accessible. You're probably reading in the news about, oh, LLMs are changing everything. ChatGPT is going to do your job. You know, this open AI company is going to replace humans in the workplace. But like, what does that mean for me as a person? Like, the average person isn't reading white papers. They can't use all of these like enterprise pieces of software that are hidden behind. You have to talk to a salesperson. But oh, making slides, that sounds like something that's within grasp to me. And that's why we made the product really easy to get in. It was free to use. It was very simple on purpose. And I think it sort of filled that sort of cultural moment well. You know, and then we did like 100 little things well around launching, doing great videos on social. But I think that was sort of the big thing.
That's incredible. And I can tell you that you look now at companies of freelancers like Fiverr, and suddenly all their business model changing because tools like Tome and others that everyone could do it on their own. It's very interesting, an inflection point in the industry. And you did a very interesting pivot after starting Tome and started Lightfield in the CRM space, as I mentioned in the intro. But can you share with us and take us to this exact moment when you decided to shut down Tome and started Lightfield and getting into a new other space with a lot of potential?
It was an interesting journey, which is to say that in Tome, we were just dealing with growth and scaling every hour, right? Of you have millions of users, you're running up your cloud bill and your inference bill, you're trying to launch things as fast as possible to stay in the moment. And you're sort of just like in this moment of fog, right? Of like the users are going up, the ARR is going up. And it actually took a moment to figure out, like, wait a minute, what's actually happening here? Right. And we started digging through all of the data of how people are using Tome. And there were a couple of scary things that we first noticed. The first one was that there was a small group of people that absolutely loved the product, but they just didn't have that many slide decks to make. You know, which is to say that we had so many freelancers and entrepreneurs and early stage startup employees, but they had a deck to make like once a month or once a quarter, you know, once a year. So it's already, I think, a yellow flag for sort of a product that requires product-led growth. You sort of need a cohort of people that use your product regularly that you can grow so that you can charge them something reasonable. And we're like, oh, this is an intrinsic problem with slides that I think we have to overcome. And it's sort of an intrinsic problem to slides and our go-to-market. Because obviously, if you build a slide product for salespeople at an enterprise, you know, they're making 8 slide decks a day. Or an investment banker, they're probably making a couple of decks a week. But it was sort of a problem with our product and our go-to-market. And that was like a foundational issue. And then we also had this technology issue, which is that people came to our website, our web app, with under the promise that we would make them work grade generative AI presentations. And I think that the truth is that we just couldn't make good on that promise for a couple of reasons. One, the models honestly just weren't that good at the time. I would argue with the latest versions of the frontier models, we're sort of there, but we certainly weren't a couple of years ago. And then the other problem, which I think was maybe the more fundamental problem, we were missing the context. So even if the model is smart enough, you sort of need enough context about the author, the audience, what they care about, what's been said before. You need quite a bit of context to generate a high quality presentation. And this is a really hard problem to solve across different functions, which is to say that the context I need to create presentations in a class in university is completely different than the context that I need to generate a presentation for someone in a finance department in a corporation, right? And there's no overlap in the context construction for like a salesperson trying to build a presentation for their new potential customers. You know, you have to go fetch the context from different data sources. You have to assemble it differently. You have to evaluate it differently. So we were like, gosh, this is the wrong kind of company. This is the wrong kind of company for the technology that we have. And I think it was a hard thing to reckon with internally, because on the one hand, you've got all of this growth and you've hired all of these people, right? And you're like, wait a minute, if really the most important property of this business is that LLMs are going to change the way that people communicate. And we've built the wrong type of business for LLMs to help people communicate. What do we do? So we shrunk the team. We sort of went from, and which was a very painful thing to do, to go from like 70 to 30. And then we eventually got to 7 before building back up again. And then we started to just explore, like, where do we go from here? And we like worked through some hypotheses. All right, like who actually makes decks every day? And then we were like looking at the overlap of who makes decks every day and who is using Tome. And we found quite a few sales and marketing folks. Cut me off if you want me to speed up or something. And then we started to study this persona of, I'm a salesperson, I'm in a tech company. What kind of decks do I make? Is it like an introductory deck, a new business deck, a business proposal, and more? And then we started to like really dive into the problem of what's going to be required to make good on this promise. And then I think we designed some good stuff. We started to build it and ran into a wall, honestly. We were like, wait a minute. So now we can do this well, but the customization of decks, it's like a mild productivity boost inside of a company, but it like doesn't matter enough to most companies to warrant buying a new tool. And you're like, okay, you saved your sales team like 30 minutes a day. Who cares? And like, what are they going to do? So we're like, wait a minute, this is an interesting problem where we now have the productivity gain here, but we actually can't make the business case to sell this B2B. And then you also can't really sell it bottoms up into a sales team, because usually the tools are regulated. So we're like, oh, all right, we solved the technology, we understand better, but the business doesn't quite work. Let's expand the aperture a little bit. And then we started to get pilots. We got a couple dozen of them with interesting technology companies and sales teams. And we were like, okay, decks alone don't matter to you, but like, what does matter to you? We're just a smart group of hardworking product ML people. Like, what could we build? And we heard a wide range of things. And they were like, generate follow-up emails, build business proposals, do research on my customers, do meeting prep, rank in probability, which of my prospects are most likely to want to buy. It's sort of like a wide range of things. And we were like, all right, let's do some of those things and see where this goes. And then the first thing that we learned was, all right, this is actually an easy enough problem if you have good context somewhere. And we're like, oh, the context must be in Salesforce. Surely everything you could possibly need to train a model must be in Salesforce. And that was sort of my naive view. So I started going into people's CRMs and our company's CRMs. And I was like, wait a minute, where's all the context? These are just fields that a sales professional fills out in like one word or one sentence after a meeting. There isn't enough here to sort of train the LLM to know what to do. Where's the rest of it? So then we started looking through call recorders. We started looking through email generation tools. We started looking through customer support tickets, product data warehouses. And we realized that it was like roughly in all of those places, but stored in all the wrong ways. Which is to say that there's just no efficient way to query all of that stuff, because it was stored using different taxonomies on different machines in systems that weren't quite interoperable. And I think we had this point of view that we're like, wait a minute, that's the work. That's the work. Like, if you sort of believe that the most interesting productivity gains here will be helping people communicate, helping people get more done in this domain, you need the context to do all of this. And the context is like not set up to be used. So we were sort of there and started to think about, like, is the right go to market, is the right strategy here to go to big companies and do all of this data cleanup, data migration work, and then slowly move over a giant company over years to your new system? Or is it sort of more interesting to start fresh I happen to believe it's rational to start fresh, but I think we also emotionally believed it was more fun to start fresh, which is to say that there are all of these new companies being built, right? Across the board. I think this is maybe the most interesting thing with the AI revolution, right? You've got, folks aren't graduating from college right now thinking, oh, I can't wait to get a job at Google, or I can't wait to get my job at McKinsey. They're probably looking out in the world and thinking, hey, I could go build a like 5-person, 20-person, 100-person company using all of this AI technology and serve someone who hasn't been able to be served before. Right. And I think that's the sort of secular trend that's really interesting, which is to say that you used to need 1,000 people to build a tech company. You'd have to hire all of these engineers and all of these salespeople. But the truth is that we're so efficient now that you could have a 5-person company, right? And actually, a lot of Lightfield's customers are like, it's a 5-person company building tech for farmers, or it's a 10-person company building tech for compliance officers, or it's a 20-person company building tech for doctors. And we were like, wait a minute, that seems way more interesting rather than trying to do enterprise tool replacement. Let's build the right sort of information architecture and tooling for this new generation of companies, and then grow with our best ones, and honestly just get a chance to clean up the sort of state of sales tech with an all-in-one solution. So I'll pause there. I realize that was a very long story, but hopefully it was interesting.
Yeah, no, that was fascinating. I can tell you that actually there was a guy that sold this company 2 weeks, and he started it on his own. I think he was the only person, and sold it for $80 million. Only one guy. It was sort of a vibe coding tool. And also we just actually interviewed the co-founder and CTO of Hobbies, which is a cybersecurity company, but they pivoted in 2017, I think, after they did the first million of ARR. It was a drastic pivot. I will not get into the details, but now after this pivot, they just reached the $300 million of ARR. So it's all about pivot and all of what entrepreneurship is all about. And I was curious, when you come to these stakeholders of Tome and you tell them, hey, I got a new idea, it's going to revolutionize CRM space, which obviously is big as it gets and a lot of potential, but how did they react and how did you communicate it with them? Because we actually also said one of your investors, Seth Rosenberg, also worked with you at Facebook, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no way around it. There was a lot of shock and skepticism. They were like, wait a minute, we invested in this AI slides product. You want to do something completely over here? And I think there was a lot of doubt. They're like, what do you mean? Like, most pivots fail. Your team is tired. You have all of these people that wanted to build slides. You don't know anything about sales. I sort of heard every version of skepticism and doubt, but I was able to effectively convince them, hey, I want to do this and I'm going to do this. So either you could get on board, or honestly, like I'll start a new company and do this again with the team. And I would say that there was a little bit of back and forth, but eventually everyone came around to, well, you know what? You're right. This is a more interesting company than the first one. And it seems like you guys know something about building products with LLMs. And it's still early. This was another thing that
Yeah.
I heard from a lot. I really appreciate one of my board members, Dan Rose from Cotu, saying that he was like, the peak of the cloud revolution was sort of 6 years in. And like year one, year two, like all of these great companies hadn't been built yet. So if you extrapolate to how many Renaissance years are we going to have with building productivity tools with LLMs, we're only like 2, 3 years in. So, like reasonable people could believe that you guys could like dust yourselves off, get back out there and still be ahead of most people. So I think it was a lot of back and forth and sort of overcoming objections. And we finally got there. I remember one of the most important things here is I think as a founder, you just need to have conviction in what you're doing, even when 1,000 people tell you that you can't. And there is a little bit of skill and motivation alignment that I think is required. I'll give you an example. I'm not a very good enterprise seller. I'll be the first one to admit it. I think there's some irony that I'm building a CRM and an all-in-one sales solution. But for what it's worth, one of my close friends at Facebook, he had created Google Maps and he couldn't find a street sign if his life depended on it. So I think there's something about building tools when you're not good at something. But I realized that there is like an enterprise sales version of the company, but I'm probably not the right CEO for it. Whereas I think this startup, small businesses, vertical SaaS version of the company, I'm actually way better at that. And I think there's this realization there. And honestly, the other part was with having hard conversations with our existing employees about what we wanted to do. Because I think the last thing you want in your new company is to have people that are like thinking about the old company. So my board helped me with this. We ended up creating this package for everyone where we're like, here's a great severance package, and our VCs are going to help you find a new job. It's available to everyone, so you should leave now if you don't want to do this. And as a result, a lot of people left. We sort of got down to 7 people. And then at that point, it had felt like all of the destruction was over. And it was like only creation from that point. And I think that was a very important sort of moment in the company's rebirth.
Absolutely. And I can tell you that you mentioned about AI only being started and about the cloud era. So cloud era started, let's say, roughly 2008, and we just got acquired for $32 billion to tackle all the cybersecurity issues in the cloud. Actually, just founded 12 years after in 2020. So there is still a time, of course. And now you're in the CRM space. You're tackling, let's say, all the biggest giants out there, like Salesforce, SAP. How do you adjust your go-to market? I can tell you that, for example, I know that Mark Benioff at the get-go, when he tried to tackle civil engineering, he just did a fake demonstrations. I don't know if it's gonna work out, but how do you tackle them?
It's sort of funny. I think for a new company to believe that they should take a chance on us versus going to HubSpot or Salesforce, one, they need to believe that we just have technological superiority, right? Two, they need to believe that even though we're missing a lot of features that Salesforce has, we're building fast enough to get there. And then three, I think they just need to believe, this is maybe the most important thing, that we understand their needs and care about their needs better than the incumbents. And this is like maybe one of the most interesting changes in software in the past few years. If you go to these like cloud websites like Salesforce and HubSpot from yesteryear, it used to be enough to be like, this is a database. It could be anything, and work with our sales team to figure out how our abstract database could maybe one day solve a business problem for you. Whereas right now, I think there's this like much higher degree of expectation of like, how does this change the way my business works now? And I think there's this opportunity to be way more direct with your narrower ICP as a startup. Like for us, we get to own, we are the AI CRM for small businesses and startups. And because of that, we make it easier to set up. We built a lot of the tooling that you would need to buy with those other systems, and we're sort of experts in small go-to-market. So we can get you from zero to highly functional much faster, much more effectively. And that actually helps a lot with the friction. To the other point of we need to build fast enough, I think that's like kind of a startups are a momentum game. And it's funny, it's sort of a crazy thing to imagine. How does a team of 20 ship faster than a team of 20,000? But I think, outside of just working hard, you sort of have to land on the right technical architecture where it's very easy to build new features and create new value. And that was a lot of the thinking, where our team ships new features every day. So I think even if we're behind, our customers are like, let's give them a few months, they'll get there. And then to the last piece, it's kind of a funny thing because on the technological superiority, if you go to Salesforce's website, they'll say they're the #1 AI CRM in the world. Nobody believes that Salesforce is an AI CRM. Right? It is an archaic database from the early 2000s, and they bought an Anthropic account and connected some features to it. And I think that's like maybe one of the most lively insertion points for us. We're like, look, no, everyone wants an AI CRM because Salesforce is creating the demand for it. They don't actually have the product to deliver. So I think we just need to prove to people like, look, that we can deliver on this promise that Salesforce is creating and can't follow up on, and that's worked out well. And to your point, we're doing all of the guerrilla tactics to get there. We host founder sales events at our office every week where we're doing go-to-market boot camps with Y Combinator founders. We actually have a truck parked outside of some of the accelerators to get founders set up with their go-to-market strategy before they go pitch investors. And I think we're sort of doing all of the things that don't scale to win all of these folks.
That's incredible. I like the track mode. It's exactly what it's all about. And it's also a great segue for my next and last question, and about CRM in general, because if you look at CRM, is about maintaining relationship, but also at the end to create new ones, right? And how do you see the balance between automation, let's say AI doing the work for the reps, and augmentation, meaning AI helping reps to tell better stories, or maybe even build relationship at the long run? And how does exactly Lightfield enter to this picture?
That's a really good question. I think the first thing that I just have to acknowledge with realism is that sales is a market-driven game, right? Which is to say that if I do something today and it gives me an edge, my competitors will do it tomorrow, and that edge is lost. And then the day after, I have to invent something new, right? It has to be a new channel, it has to be a new product, it has to be a new way of selling, it has to potentially be a new approach to go to market. So it's just like a non-stop game of invention. And I actually don't think that LLMs in this generation are good enough to play that game for you. And this is why there was this cohort of companies that were building the sort of AI SDRs, which was instead of hiring someone straight out of school and asking them to send emails and LinkedIn messages and call your potential customers, instead you were going to get AI to do that. That just doesn't work because everyone is using the same AI SDRs. And as a customer, you're inundated with AI slop in your email, and then you turn off the channel and you sort of have to invent something new. It's funny, we had this like very sober view on what can we do in sales, and it's really resonating with the market around. We're like, look, there are thousands of companies that are promising you if you click this button you'll have more customers. We don't do that. We believe that you will always want to do large transactions through humans, and we believe that like humans are going to have to keep inventing different ways to sell their product, convince you that you can solve their problems and more, and we're just here to augment those humans. So we very much see ourselves as a through and through co-pilot for talented salespeople and founders. And what does that mean? We will help you prioritize. We will help you prepare for meetings so you show up well informed. We will handle the follow-ups for you of like emails, proposals, decks, and analysis. And then we'll also help you understand your go-to-market better, which is, I think, one of the hardest things to do right now. When you have a sales team and you're falling out of product market fit, or there's a new emerging opportunity from your customers, it's so hard to pull that stuff out. And we want to build a tool that basically allows you to have a supercomputer to query all of your customer interactions and get truth. And we set out to do all of those things really, really well, which is to say that there's a YC company that has a cool tech demo of all of those things, but we set out to do the best version of those things so that you can rely on it. And that's really what's working for us.
It seems like the whole package really of CRM in one place, and it's super revolutionary and exciting to see where you're going next. And Keith, I got a bunch of more questions for you, but Alvaro here, my friend, is also a great question to ask you. So Alvaro, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jesse. So, Keith, we've talked a lot about the revolution that we are right now, early stages of AI. And you mentioned before, one of the bigger competitors is just a very big database that has a lot built on top, right? So we're now talking about startups that fine-tune data sets that are sometimes open and sometimes private, right? So how do you balance leveraging the proprietary customer data for model training with protecting the privacy and compliance?
I think in this space, trust and compliance matter more than anything. Right? Which is to say that you just won't use a product if you believe that your competitors are benefiting from your insights. And we've heard this over and over again. We have some customers that are like, hey, I want to use your product, but I don't want to use the OpenAI models because I don't even want the 0.01% chance that I'm helping Microsoft properties that are competing with me. And because of that, we've actually developed a point of view that First of all, it's your data, not ours. And because of that, you have full control, full portability. We actually make it really easy to migrate off of Lightfield to a Salesforce if you want. We haven't had anyone do it, but they actually feel really comfortable knowing that. I would say, unlike our contemporary Salesforce, that makes it very hard to take your data out of it. And then the other piece that we've learned is that I think we're in a stage of post-training rather than pre-training, which is to say that I think we can get really high performance product just by doing reinforcement learning and not really needing to get to fine tuning. So we do great work with context engineering. We do great work with sort of reinforcement learning on each instance, but we don't actually take any insights from one customer's CRM and move it to another customer's CRM. We found that we can just like structurally do great work without any of that like ingestion of customer data.
That's great to hear. That's a slightly different. You're doing something very different from the bigger competitors. But okay,
Yeah.
we are moving now to the trust, right? Which is something you've talked about before. And
Yeah.
as AI starts drafting outbound emails and with a nudging strategy, do you risk creating a world where every rep sounds the same? So how would you avoid commoditizing this relationship because you're using AI?
I mean, I think the nature of market dynamics is that if you sound like AI is writing your emails for you and sending them for you automatically, customers just aren't going to speak to you. Right. And I think that's the sort of like feedback loop that we're facing. I mean, I had it this morning where I 100% got an automated AI email from someone who I was thinking about purchasing a product from, and I'm just not going to respond to them. It's over. So I think the first thing is we have to build a system that is honest. I'll give you an example. We built a system that will draft emails for you, but you have to read them and send them, and make you read all of them before sending them. There's no button of like send 100 emails and pray. We just don't think that's going to yield good behavior. And then the other thing that we do is we've put a lot of effort into both sort of customer memory, meaning like the CRM understands the way your company sells, who you sell, the way you'd like to sell, but also user memory around, Keith writes to his customers in this way and Yossi writes to his customers in this other way. And it's our job to sort of emulate that so that it really feels like an extension of you rather than it feeling like this is an AI email. And this is actually something we put a lot of work into because I think humans have this ability to detect whether something came from the uncanny valley. I think if you read 50 emails, you'll be able to be like, oh, these 40 were written by a person, and these 10 were definitely not written by a person. They're like grammatically correct, but there's just something off about them. And I think if we're ever in this uncanny valley, the product just doesn't work.
Absolutely agree with you. And at some point, like you said before, like you just ignore emails. That's absolutely what I do. Like this is clearly not a person. So if that's going to be the case, then I'd rather just not waste time. So moving into hype versus reality with AI agents, right? We see that many companies get stuck in experimentation. You're trying to get a really good product, you try to refine it, and then this means that you take a long time to go to market. What can product teams do to accelerate the time to demo, at least to get into production?
It's a good question. I think, look, there's no real shortcuts here. I think the companies that do really well, honestly, just really narrow their scope and do a few things better, get those things to production and sort of move out from there. I'll give you an example. We haven't had a lot of luck with MCP yet, the sort of model context protocol. We know that there's going to be a lot of investment in it. It'll be great one day, but you can't just use MCP to connect 100 data sources to your CRM and then have your CRM know what to do with it and produce good output. It just doesn't work that way. I actually think the last mile is the hardest when working with LLMs, and it's deceptive, right? Because you can definitely build a cool demo at a hackathon in 24 hours, but then going from hackathon to this is something that someone will use in their enterprise, that's the part that takes months, that's the part that takes years. So I found the folks that just really narrow scope and put a lot of effort into that last mile are the ones that go the furthest. And then those are the people that earn the right to build the next feature. And I think you earn the right to do more for your customers by serving them well with the first thing you promised. And we've taken that approach too. And there's sort of no shortcuts with that.
And you mentioned it before, like you mentioned it briefly, where right now we're seeing a lot of new models and announcements and all the time that we are a little bit in a hype bubble and there's a lot of noise. So how do you prioritize which model you're going to use or where you're going to point the direction of development?
So we've set up a pretty sophisticated eval system. We sort of built a golden set for everything that Lightfield does. For prepare me for my meeting, write this email, and we have a lot of business analysis questions. I think the most frequent one in Lightfield is like, how has my ICP changed in the past month? It's like every CEO is paranoid about it. You're like, I thought we were selling here, but we're actually selling here. And then we've given our system just human written responses that we think are pretty good. And then we've asked some CROs to look at it and some business people to look at it. And then honestly, every time there's a new model, we'll just throw it into the system and take a look. And we're like, is this trending in the right direction? Is this trending in the worst direction? We'll like try it out with a few customers and eventually move to production. I've found for what it's worth, we're starting to plateau a little bit with the reasoning, in my opinion, in our use case. The difference between like Claude 4.1 and Claude 4, it's sort of marginal. I think a user would have a hard time with it. The thing that we're most excited about is honestly effective context, which is to say that I know every model company says that they've got like a million token context window, right? But you can only use 10-15% of it before your reasoning degrades. So I think honestly, the larger the effective context window, the harder and harder tasks we'll be able to do in a business context.
So now it is more and more important that we're delivering value, and we're seeing that there's a lot of enterprises talking a lot about the AI agents. And to be honest, it's a little bit of hit and miss in my experience. You go to some companies that have relatively capable ones, others are so frustrating, and at the end, they just put you on with a real person. Can you tell us a little bit about how you assess value in these new technologies?
I mean, honestly, I think the trial is the only way, right? Which is to say that I think one of the challenges a lot of these startups and bigger companies face with AI procurement is everyone's got a great demo and a great sales deck. And then before committing long term, you just have to try the technology out and see if it can get to the outcomes that you want. And that's why we're seeing, I think there's this famous MIT study that showed 95% of these enterprise AI trials are failing. So I think that the proof is really in the pudding. But for what it's worth, I don't think the LLMs are at a state now where they're going to replace human creativity. I wouldn't trust anyone making a claim that an LLM is going to change your business strategy or invent your new marketing campaign or find this new way of selling your product that no one has ever tried before. I think they're great at emulation repeatability, but they're not tools for creativity just yet, at least in the text processing domain. But I think they're really good at repeatable work that doesn't change very much. So I think that's why there's been just so much traction with compliance. I think that's why there's been so much traction in customer service. And I think that's why there's honestly a lot of traction in like ERP and in finance. But I don't think we've like yet cracked systems that are sort of smart enough to create alpha for you.
Create something from nothing is already difficult, and I'm just concerned where we are all going to go at a moment where all the fun and creative stuff is done by a machine and we're just left doing laundry. So that's just my 2 cents. So we're now coming to the last part of the interview, which is the very difficult questions because these are the personal questions. Okay, so in your career, which has been very interesting and very varied in the size of companies you work for and now being an entrepreneur, what's the best piece of advice that you would give to an entrepreneur that is starting today?
It's funny. I think entrepreneurship is a game of survival and persistence. And in my dark days when we were sort of pivoting the company, I realized that honestly, for most great entrepreneurs, most people that have built legendary companies, just survived long enough building their business to get lucky. And I think this is like a very common pattern you see that most great companies weren't built year one, year two, year three. Actually, your chance of success goes way up year four, year five. And there have been so many legendary companies. I'm just finishing the book on James Dyson, who was an inspiration for what we're doing. But it wasn't until like year 15 when things started to really work. And I really think your ability to focus and spend more time on a problem than anyone else is like probably the most important trait.
And in alongside your career, you must have had good bosses, not so good bosses, and mentors, right? So can you tell us who was the most impactful mentor in your journey?
I would say there are two people that really stood out. One is on my board with Seth Reed Hoffman, who I think just puts a lot of emphasis on get the market and the idea right first and like get to the details second. And I think it's been an inspiration for me as someone who historically has been, pretty good at execution and maybe bad at choosing the right idea. But it's sort of something I'm overcoming. This time I think the idea is pretty good. And the other person that's been really influential in my life is Kevin Systrom, the CEO of Instagram. And I feel like he sort of had to teach me the hard way, how hard it is to build products that people love. I think this was maybe one of the most important learnings I had, that it's honestly just sweat and perspiration going from 80% done to something that's delightful. And that's honestly the difference. When you look at a product that's like delightful, like an Instagram or like a Dyson vacuum cleaner, someone just put the sweat into it to think like, how should these things fit together? How should this really work? This is a little awkward. Let me go back to the drawing board and redesign it. And I think that people notice those things, whether they can count it or not. And if you can create the best product in the space, the rest is a little bit easier.
And you really like your job, but I suppose that you do have a life outside of your job. So what kind of hobbies do you do, or what do you do for fun?
Yeah. So I have an 18-month-old, so I'm obviously trying to teach him how to code. Long way to go, but I'm excited for him to maybe have a shot at entrepreneurship. When I was pivoting Tome, I found that I needed space to think. And honestly, it was hard to get any space to think because at the office, there's all of this dread around what are we going to do next? Where's it going to go? And at home, I've got the baby crying, and my wife is doing her best to work through it. But I found a lot of the space I needed through cycling. So I think one of the strangest parts of the pivot was I went and bought this really light road bike and just went like out in strange hours of the morning doing 40, 50 miles. And that's actually where I got my deep thinking done. And it's still where I get a lot of my deep thinking done for our company strategy.
I think you're not the only one that has told me something similar. Just get on the road and then that 2 hours that you do there. Okay, any favorite movie or book that you'd recommend?
So I'll go with book. There were two that I was thinking through. The first one is I'm finishing up James Dyson's autobiography, and I think it's just so incredible. I think one of the things that I love the most about it is I think the great entrepreneurs are the ones that go into spaces where that have real problems and no inspiration, and then they like invent something inspirational there. And I think if you can take a servant mentality and go into a space like vacuum cleaners, right? And then build the most technologically advanced, most design forward product in the space, charge what you deserve to charge, you could absolutely take the category. And that's how I feel about CRM, to be honest. I think that CRM is this huge space built by uninspired people trying to make money. Which is to say that, like, if you looked at Salesforce or if you look at HubSpot, you can tell the company isn't run by the inventors anymore. This is the company that has been trying to squeeze every dollar out of a tool that was novel 20 years ago. And I just hope that when we launch our product in the next few weeks, that people look at this as like, oh, someone really cared about this, sweat the details, and sort of built something inspirational, and I'm ready to try it. So that's sort of I think maybe my best book recommendation.
You told me already part of the answer of the next question I'm going to ask, which is what keeps you motivated? You've been through ups and downs, but what keeps you motivated? What keeps you going every day?
Would say two things. One, I think there's just this desire to be able to create a story for my son that his dad didn't quit when things got hard. And I think that's just like an important personal meaning thing that I think drives me. And then the other thing that I found is very important for the company that you're building is that you have to love the people you serve. Because at the end of the day, as a CEO or a founder, you are going to be dealing with your customers unhappy, their challenges, their issues with your product and your service every day. And you just have to, at a deep level, care about these people. And I think if you do and you care about making them successful and happy, then I think your job as a founder is easier. And that's one of the things that attracted me to Lightfield. I could get excited in the future about getting a Fortune 500 company to be 5% larger. But the thing that drives me now is that I think the American dream is still alive, but it's through entrepreneurship rather than joining a big company. And I think the path right now in America is to move to Silicon Valley or really anywhere and learn technology, learn go to market, and build a business that can endure using AI. Like, I think the opportunity here is create your 5-person company and pull yourself into independence. And I think building tooling to give more people a chance to create financial independence is very important to me.
It's a great, great answer. But let's say that if you had a chance to redo anything and you weren't building a startup, if there was anything else that you could be doing, what would it be? Would it be playing soccer, basketball? What would it be?
Yeah. So I grew up in Canada and played ice hockey. And I'm a pretty short guy. You can probably tell over Zoom. I'm like 5'7", and I think a lot of what I was dealing with growing up was like reckoning with, oh, I'm like at a disadvantage being a great goalie. But I think I'd love to have a redo of just embracing the constraints and being the best version of that, and maybe an alternate universe. So that's one. And then, if I wasn't building this startup, which I deeply care about, I would love to go build a physical world startup, which is to say that I think the time is right to go build micro reactors. And I think the time is coming up soon to go build household robots. And I can't wait to build the diaper changing robot, maybe for my kids to use when they grow up. And I think that's just going to be a lot of fun.
It definitely sounds, and it definitely looks like that's not going to be that far off in the future. At least I want to believe it. Just so that if I have to stay at home and not do the creative stuff because an AI model is doing it for me, at least that I have a robot that can do the laundry for me. Because if not, that would be very depressing. Keith, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for the time and answering our questions. Yossi, back to you.
Yeah, so Keith, thank you so much, Israel. I mean, it's been really a pleasure. Fascinating story indeed. And you mentioned Reid Hoffman. So I think even Reid, when he started LinkedIn in the first couple of years, they had a little bit of a hard time to get some traction. So it's all about entrepreneurship. It keep going no matter what. It's been a pleasure. And for everybody else in the audience, so stay tuned. We have other fascinating episodes. The chairman of Qualcomm gonna join us. CTO of Armis, Andriy Horowitz, Index Ventures, and a bunch of other interesting folks. So thank you so much.